It's the 64th minute in a tightly contested game between Barcelona and Atletico Madrid. Barcelona have possession deep in their own half, and Atletico are locked into a man-marking system. Suddenly, the keeper is closed down, so Barcelona move the ball indirectly into the centre-back. The attacking midfielder then moves towards the ball and becomes an option to pass to in the centre, but he can't turn around as pressure is quickly coming from behind. So he lays it off into the holding midfielder, now with space to switch play to the right flank. We see this same pattern on the right wing, then one more time right outside Atletico Madrid's box, finally leading to Dani Olmo slotting past the keeper to make it 2-1. In just 22 seconds, Barcelona have gone from one end of the pitch to the other, and have used the same passing combination 4 different times. Barcelona are certainly not the only team to have figured out the dangers of third-man combinations, and now more than ever, this idea is at the core of nearly every attacking move. On paper, it's one of the most simple tactics in football, but in reality, it's much more complicated than it seems. It requires perfect timing, positioning, and a collective understanding to be successful, and just one mistake can lead to disaster. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the key elements of a successful third-man combination, from its use during build-up to how it can penetrate a defensive block. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why this pattern is the hardest combination to stop in football. Welcome back to Football Meta. The idea of the third man is not new, and has been a part of football essentially since its origin. Long before it had a name, it was already embedded into the principles of Dutch total football in the 60s and 70s, where constant movement and playing one pass ahead were fundamental. Johan Cruyff later helped turn this pattern into a coachable idea, but it's Guardiola who's widely regarded as the manager who fully formalized the third man as a core principle of positional play, turning it from improvisation into a repeatable solution used to break pressing lines. Fast forward to the modern game and third-man combinations can be seen everywhere, and a lot of managers have built their whole philosophy on this idea. The third man is so difficult to defend because it exploits a fundamental weakness both in how teams defend and human psychology. There are essentially 2 ways a defender can mark a player. They can shadow mark, so block off the direct passing lane by staying in front of the player, or they can mark the player from behind and track their movements. But they cannot do both at the same time, so by involving a third player, it becomes much easier to bypass this defender. Secondly, when a ball gets played beyond a defender, instinctively they will turn to face the ball, and will start running in that direction. And in that split second is when the third man becomes an option, moving past the opponent in their blind spot and receiving the ball already facing goal. However, its use can vary greatly depending on the situation, so let's break it down into the 3 key phases of attack, starting with build-up. From build-up against the high press is where these combinations are easiest to spot, but it's also the area that can have the most dangerous consequences if not done correctly, so its implementation needs to be as precise as possible. Which also means there's less room for creativity in this area. In this position, the vast majority of the time, the whole team will be marked from behind, so the idea is to free a player to receive the ball with space ahead of them. The goalkeeper is very often the key player to make this possible, and there's a lot of different options they can choose. Firstly, let's say they want to use the most common move, which is a third-man pass into the centre-back. For this to work, the keeper needs to be closed down, so he needs to wait until the pressure is at its highest. If he doesn't wait long enough, then once the holding midfielder wants to pass it back to the centre-back, then there's not enough space for him to do so. Second, this player in the centre needs to recognise where the pressure is coming from. If the pressure on the keeper came from the left, then the ball needs to go to the left centre-back. If it came from the right, then vice versa. Third, this centre-back needs to be quick to give the team an option. If he passes it to the keeper and then doesn't move up the pitch, then the holding midfielder doesn't have anyone to pass to. For example, let's take a look at this clip here. Real Oviedo are playing out from the back. As the centre-back receives the ball, he instantly passes it back to the keeper. But by not waiting for the opponent to fully close him down, he hasn't forced the opponent to make a choice, and the keeper is instantly under pressure. Once they play it into the centre, the free player in this situation is the right centre-back. So the third man pass needs to go back in this direction so they have space to push forward. However, the body positioning and orientation of the pass is slightly off, and it goes back into this area where the opponents have a lot of players ready to intercept the pass. Another example of teams doing this incorrectly can be seen with Pisa in the Serie A. Here, they successfully lure the press onto the keeper, but the centre-back doesn't give the team an option. So the holding midfielder is in a tricky position. If the centre-back had shifted further out wide or slightly further up the pitch, then it would have created a much more dangerous situation. But by staying relatively still, there are pretty much no more options for this player here. A team that does this well is Como under Fabregas, with the centre-backs ready to receive this layoff and push forward. At times, you can use more aggressive defensive shapes to your advantage and skip one passing lane. For example, in this clip here from Chelsea, Fernandes is quickly being closed down, and Aston Villa are ready to apply pressure to the free player. They've done so by having the left winger dropping his marker Reece James and pushing forward. So Fernandes uses this to his advantage to skip one pass and find Reece James with space to push forward. Arguably one of the best managers in recent years to pioneer this use of third-man combinations during build-up is Roberto Dezerbi, with calculated third-man combinations being used to break the first few lines of the press. One detail that makes a huge difference is how his holding midfielders are positioned, and they will try to stay as close to the first pressing line as possible. It seems counterintuitive to essentially mark yourself, but in reality you're creating a huge overload, and it can create big gaps if not dealt with correctly. In this example, we can see how the holding midfielder moves with the opponent's first line, and the opposition's two midfielders are all the way back here. If they followed these movements all the way up here, then it would simply create a more dangerous gap further up the pitch. Once the defender finds space to pass forward, the striker quickly drops off the defensive line and can lay it off into one of the holding midfielders. This is a pattern you see a lot in most teams playing out from the back. The best solution to this is an aggressive man-marking system that follows every single player, but this layoff is still very difficult to intercept even if the player is followed closely. So in this area of the pitch, the aim of the game is to attract pressure onto the keeper so you can free an outfield player. Then once you've successfully lured the opposition into this position, then it can create a domino effect of other defenders having to adapt. However, a lot of managers want to skip two pressing lines instantly, and that's where a more direct long version of third-man combinations can be seen. In recent years, long goal kicks have made a sort of comeback, but it's not the same type of goal kick that was popular 20 years ago. These long balls are often much softer, looking to play it into the striker, dropping off the defensive line and finding a third-man combination in the centre. The timing here is crucial as well. The players in the middle will likely be marked, so the striker needs to understand the right pocket of space to lay the ball off. Or it's very easy for the opponents to regain possession and start a quick counter. If successful, this more direct approach can be extremely dangerous, as the wingers are then perfectly positioned to attack in behind the defensive line. Before we go any further, if you like these animations you see in this video, then you can recreate them too with my tactical animation software FM Stadio. We launched FM Stadio around 2 months ago and the feedback has been absolutely incredible so far. We've been listening to everyone's feedback and we've already added a ton of new features like animated player text, improved project management, and new stadium designs to name a few. And we will be constantly updating the software to make it better and better over time. Some of the features you guys love are the dedicated training equipment and pitch lines so you can create your own exercises to share with the team, and that you can export your projects in 4K 60 FPS both in landscape or portrait, which is perfect for sharing on social media. You can try it for free on fmstadio.com. This is a community-driven project, so your feedback and support is extremely valuable to us. So thank you so much to everyone who's used FM Stadio so far. So we move out of build-up and into the second phase of attack with progression in midfield. In this position, the possibilities of third-man combinations are endless. But once again, they exploit an inherent weakness in how teams defend. But it all depends on what the defending team is doing. More zonal defensive systems will want to keep specific lines. The advantage being you can keep a slightly more aggressive shape and not concede too much room. So for example, if against a strict 4-4-2, a midfield line will only drop so far before an offensive player will then be free to receive the ball. And a defensive line can't always follow any player dropping off the defensive line. This is where systems like the 3-2-5 can overload a defense, and these pockets in the half space are the perfect target for third man passes. This interview from Xavi talking about Barcelona's tactics under Pep Guardiola explains this perfectly, and is still relevant to this day.
Balón que tiene número 6, ya hemos superado la primera línea de presión, ¿no? Y es uno de estos dos el que salta a presionar a número 6. Yo no puedo contactar con este hombre. Este se va a convertir en el tercer hombre, ¿de acuerdo? ¿Por qué? Porque vamos a utilizar a un segundo hombre para jugar con el tercero. Y así constantemente. Hoy en día es clave, porque muchas veces saltan la segunda línea de presión, la primera ya la hemos superado, balón aquí, salta la primera línea de presión, este hombre no puede contactar directamente con este, que al final es el objetivo, atacar cuadrados, jugar a cuadrados para atacar línea defensiva, ¿no?
However, these strict lines are not as common as they were a few seasons ago, and the more common approach is what you see with more man-oriented systems. In this case, their movements attract wherever they go, so you'll likely not have any space in midfield, but you can also gain more control of the pitch, so you move straight into the final third. This is, for example, what we saw Man United doing against Arsenal in the Premier League, not allowing them to find a free player in the centre and forcing play consistently out wide, not concerned with forming a line of 5 or 6 players in defence. We can also see this pattern with Roma under Gasperini, notorious for his man-marking principles. So in this case, the third man combinations are mostly seen out wide just outside the box, which we'll look at later on. When it comes to breaking this midfield line, there are few better examples than Guardiola. His current setup at City is designed nearly entirely on tight combinations in the centre. By overloading the midfield with technical quality, Man City will often look to go into Haaland, who can knock it down between the lines into these 3 players. Or very frequently, Man City will go directly into the midfielders, who can turn and play a through ball in behind. Take this chance against Chelsea. As soon as Reinders lays it off, he attacks forward. They find Rodri between the lines in space to turn and play a through ball. And we can see this same pattern in a lot of Man City's attacks. Rather than going forward and then backwards, they look to play more directly by breaking one line and instantly breaking the second, with a third man run into the space behind the defence. One team that is excellent at breaking midfield lines is Inter. Under Chivu, Inter are a more direct team compared to Inzaghi, and the vast majority of their attacks start from a deep position. Because of their 3-5-2 shape, there is often a lot of space on the flanks, which they will use to play the wing-backs in behind. In fact, when talking about Inter, we're actually more frequently talking about the fourth man. Take for example their goal to make it 4-0 against Como. They play the ball directly into midfield and look for a layoff into the centre. From here, there is so much space on the left flank for DiMarco to run into, with space to then cross into the box in behind the defensive line. So with all these combinations, we now find ourselves in the final third. There's only one line left to break, but this is the trickiest one to get right. But it's also where teams can get the most creative, as the risk of losing possession is at its lowest. We've seen a couple of examples already with Man City and Inter, but when it comes to actually getting a player in behind the defence, there's one pattern we see consistently, and that is the run into the half space. Regardless of the team, this is a brilliant way of getting a player into a dangerous position. By moving the ball out wide into the winger, it pulls the fullback over to the flank, freeing a gap in behind for a player to run into. A difficult position to track, as it often requires a midfielder to follow this movement. In Europe right now, there's few better examples of this than Barcelona, specifically out wide on the right with Koundé and Yamal. This is a route Barcelona will almost always look to exploit, and it very frequently leads to them getting an easy opportunity with a simple cutback back across the box. What's interesting is that they can often use this run as a decoy as well. Take for example this move here. Yamal has possession out wide and Koundé attacks the half space. This drags a defender out of position and frees up a dangerous central channel for a ball into Olmo attacking the box. Ultimately, the third man combination is more than just a passing pattern. Whether it's the goalkeeper luring the striker out of position to free a centre back, or a midfielder making a blindside run into the half space, the objective is always the same: to manipulate the opponent's shape and strike where they aren't looking. So next time you see a player receiving the ball between the lines with the whole pitch ahead of them, they're not just lucky, they're the third man. But now let me know what you think. What other teams have mastered this idea, and what other patterns should we look at in modern football? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.